Rates of taxation were very high. In 1962, President Kennedy met Dr. Erhard in Germany. Dr. Erhard told him, don't make the mistake of having high rates of taxation as in England and as prevail in your country. Lower them. President Kennedy did lower them. He lowered them drastically, far more drastically than our rates have been lowered this year, far more drastically. And there was a joke prevalent in the United States at that time that President Kennedy wanted to have programs of social uplift, development, helping the poor, hospitals, etc. And people asked him, where are you going to get the money from? The answer was, from tax cuts, of course. It is the tax cuts which give you the money. How? Because when you reduce your level of taxation, you expand the base to which the tax rates apply. And that's how you generate more resources. So you pay for public services out of tax cuts, not out of increasing the rates of taxation. This is one of the basic fallacies underlying most people who are not very well informed or very familiar with the basic laws of economics. People think that by increasing rates, the government gets more revenue. It's exactly the other way about. Now, President Kennedy therefore achieved the miracle, and in the United States the rate has been, in the recent years, only 50% maximum as we have here. Let me come to times closer to our own times, 1979. In 1979, these things happened. Ireland, which had a wealth tax, abolished wealth tax altogether. West Germany, which had a wealth tax, drastically reduced the rates of wealth tax. The United States, which had a capital gains tax, drastically reduced the rate of capital gains tax. And in England, when the maximum marginal rate on personal income was 83%, it was reduced to 60%. Come to the year 1982. In Sweden, where the rate on personal taxation, maximum rate was 85%, it was lowered to 50%. A drop, 35 percentage points drop from 85 to 50. In 1982. Because, as I said, Dr. Gunnar Myrdal pointed out that you are making a thoroughly dishonest nation out of perfectly honest people. Why don't you make your rates reasonable? And this is what the government did in 1982. Let me come to 1984, the last year. In Britain, a budget was introduced by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Lawson, who said, from 55%, I'll take this year the company rate to 50%. Next year, 45%. After that, 40%. And after that, 35%. It's all laid down so you can plan ahead. Do your business knowing full well that from 55 it will drop to 35%. And the country is for the first time, Britain, emerging out of the economic mess in which it was a few years ago. Now in the light of this human experience, and mind you, human nature is the same. It is not as if this country is peopled by archangels. They are the same human beings with the same self-interest, with the same desire to look after themselves and their families first. If anything, in India, that spirit is more pronounced than in other countries. Because here sometimes the concern ends with the family, doesn't go to the country at all, extend to the country at all. Whereas in other countries, you start with your self-interest, but you do look ahead and see how far your self-interest is in conflict with the national interest. So if you have to apply the philosophy of self-interest to be promoted, the forces of human nature not sought to be demolished, but sought to be used to national advantage. If you want to apply that philosophy, it would apply a fortiori to a country like India. So the budget has taken the bull by the horns and did the right thing with courage. It has cut income tax rates all along the line. And the maximum rate will now be 50%, and there will be no surcharge. The surcharge was a ridiculous provision. In the Constitution, a surcharge is provided to meet eventualities. There may be a war, you may have to fight a war. Or there may be an insurrection in one part of the country. Or there may be a drought, a famine, or a great national calamity like a heavy flood. Well, then you can levy a surcharge. But because of the ignorance of our people and because of the greed of politicians, we kept on having the surcharge year after year for decades. It became a routine method. This minister had the honesty to remove it because there is really no justification today for a surcharge. The compulsory deposit scheme has been removed. It was an irritant, and apart from the fact that it did mean a certain financial outlay, the trouble and the irritation caused by this scheme was such that its removal was, to my mind, totally justified. Take wealth tax. Wealth tax has been reduced across the slab, and now the maximum rate is 2% instead of 5%. You can't tax people at 5% wealth tax. If you try to do that, your efforts will fail. The human being will not change. Whenever the law and the forces of human nature come in conflict, it is law which is vanquished and not the forces of human nature. Always let's remember that. In fact, since the Field Marshal is in the chair, I may use an analogy which may be appropriate. That when with very high levels of taxation, you are trying to fight against human nature, you are fighting a Vietnam War. It's a wrong war conducted with wrong weapons against the wrong enemy on the wrong battlefield. You cannot succeed. And that's how you find in the Soviet Union, where death penalty is prescribed for dealing in foreign exchange. One of the eminent ear-nose throat specialists of India was telling me how that chauffeur would still ask for dollars, running the risk of a death sentence. This is human nature. And if you find it in communist countries, are you surprised that you find the same phenomenon here? Now, estate duty, well, the Field Marshal referred to it. It is bound to at least have this consolation brought to the family when a death occurs in the family, that they will not be rendered homeless. You should have seen the type of steps which have been taken in several cases, where a man owns a house, he dies, and the estate duty authorities say we shall value it as if it's an empty house, because you can sell, by getting out you can sell it as an empty house, and on that basis we shall levy wealth tax. Of course, recently that law was changed, but that was only very recently. For years, people continue to be assessed to wealth tax on the basis that you can go on the streets, you the dependents of the deceased, but we'll value it as an empty house available for occupation by the buyer. Now, you cannot levy estate duty. And how much was being collected? 20 crores. In a budget where the government revenue comes to 20,000 crores, 20 crores was the total collection from estate duty. It benefited nobody except lawyers and chartered accountants. No one else. The government did not benefit because the cost of collection was more than the tax collected. And therefore it's very wise that estate duty is abolished. Let no tears be shed over it. Let no misguided socialists say that in this country we need estate duty. If you say it, it only means what was said about Irish politics, that if you are not confused, you are not well informed. And if you are not confused about estate duty, you are not well informed. You only have to read the Act to see for yourself how it works. And if you are a champion of estate duty, it means you have never read the Act. So these are the sensible steps which will promote economic efficiency in this country. And I am all in favor of these steps, but it imposes a corresponding duty on the people. I would earnestly beseech everyone to prove to the government that we are worthy of the trust reposed in us. let this 50% rate of tax result in honest compliance, in better compliance with the law, in more honest disclosures of income. In fact, it's interesting that the finance minister has not taken credit for any less income tax on account of the lowering of the rates. He has said the lowered rates will command better compliance from the people, more honest returns, and I shall get no less revenue than the government used to get before. It is what is called in economics the Laffer curve. There is an economist in California today, a young man whose name is Laffer, and he made a curve which has become world famous. According to that curve, you collect the same amount of tax whether you levy one rate or another rate. Of course, it doesn't mean any one rate and any other rate, but carefully selected one rate. For example, suppose you levied 80% income tax and you levied 40% income tax, you would get the same amount of tax. Why? Because with 80% less compliance, with 40% better compliance. If you levied 0% tax, you would get no tax at all. Likewise, if you levied 100% tax, you would get no tax at all, because who is going to work to give you 100% tax? So with 100% tax, government's collection zero. With 0% tax, government's collection zero. With 40% tax, the government's collection is no less than with 80% tax. This is the Laffer curve. And when I find people, political parties saying it's a rich man's budget, I tell myself, let's not be political in these matters. Let us have the interest of the country at heart. And if you find a good thing done, never mind who does it, whether I do it or you do it, let us applaud what is the right thing done in this country.